The waters surrounding Britain, particularly Scotland, are famous for their cold, deep, and pristine waters, a perfect environment for fostering marine life and high-quality seafood. But the vast majority of the UK's yearly catch is packaged and shipped abroad, mainly to Spain and France.
Ser la leche.
C'est malade.
Why is this? Despite living on an island surrounded by ideal waters, the British don't traditionally eat a wide variety of seafood. Looking at the cuisines of other notable island nations like Japan, Iceland, Indonesia, Madagascar, and Taiwan, we find that their traditional menus are loaded with various seafood dishes, ranging from hundreds of different species of fish, mollusks, and crustaceans. Even regions that aren't necessarily islands, but just have extensive coastlines, tend to favor seafood-rich diets. After all, it's only natural that historically, pre-modern humans would gravitate towards food sources that were geographically easy to access. And if one finds themselves surrounded by water, they will usually capitalize on food from that water, and gradually develop a culture and tradition of eating seafood. In order for us to better understand why the British seem so seafood averse, let's start by looking at the limited seafood dishes that they do traditionally eat. Ironically, and on the contrary to this entire video, perhaps the most famous traditional English dish is, you guessed it, fish and chips. However, even this iconic English dish has foreign origins. In the 16th century, Spanish and Portuguese Jewish immigrants introduced the fried fish dish to the English. And it was not until the 1860s that the fish and chip shops that we're so familiar with today began sprouting around London and eventually the rest of the British Isles. Eating fried fish was appealing to the English population, particularly those that would otherwise be offended by the fishy smell and flavor of the meat. Fun fact, the UK's unofficial national dish today is another foreign introduction, Indian curry, chicken tikka masala to be more precise. To start, let's clarify that the British people do indeed eat seafood. Coastal regions throughout the UK have had long histories of sustaining their populations on the fishing industry. Billingsgate Fish Market in London, one of the UK's oldest fish markets, can trace its origins back to the 16th century, servicing early fishermen and fishmongers. The market served as a gateway for seafood to be distributed throughout England. Even for inland populations, monks recorded having ponds at many monasteries, stocked with freshwater fish and eel that were regularly eaten. But the amount of seafood dishes in the UK just doesn't quite suffice, considering the population's close proximity to water. One theory revolves around religion. In 1534, King Henry VIII breaks away from the Roman Catholic faith and founds the Anglican Church, marking the beginning of the English Reformation. As the Reformation progressed, over several decades, it increasingly became dangerous to openly practice Catholicism. Catholic monasteries are closed and followers are persecuted. Lent and the act of abstinence from meat on Good Friday is now uniquely Catholic, as most Protestants no longer acknowledge the practice of giving up meat on Fridays. Since Catholics usually eat seafood as a substitution for meat, over time, eating seafood became associated with Catholicism, a very negative connotation in pre-modern England. Although eating different types of fish was not completely uncommon throughout Britain, shellfish has, for most of history, had a very bad rap. Seaside holiday towns were known to be lined with stalls selling cockles and mussels targeted at the poor and working class. These undesirable bottom feeders were considered bycatch by fishermen, unintentionally netted while attempting to catch fish. Shellfish and crustaceans of all sorts were considered unfit for consumption by the upper class. This same culture was passed on from the British to the American colonists all the way up through the 19th century. Lobsters, which were in abundance on the Pacific Northeast, were regularly used as fertilizer or fed to prisoners, slaves, and indentured servants. In one Massachusetts town, a group of indentured servants took their masters to court and won, protecting them from having to eat lobster more than 3 times a week. As standards of living improved with the growth of the middle class following the Industrial Revolution, the British mostly did away with the custom of eating bottom feeders, as even the lower classes could afford terrestrial meats. The last theory may kind of seem like a silly idea, but all the same bears truth. Unlike many cultures around the world, the general British population has, for many generations, been separated from the butchering process. Unless you're directly working in the animal farming or fishing industries, you likely have never or few times experienced firsthand the process of transitioning a whole animal into a dish onto the family dining table. Before the advent of modern refrigeration and transport technologies, food spoilage was a major concern. Land animals do not spoil as quickly after butchering, meaning you have a longer window of time to transport a slab of chicken breast, pork loin, or beef rib to the dinner table. Seafood, on the other hand, should be shipped whole, lobster with its head on in its shell, and fish with its head on in its skin and scales to prevent spoilage. There is an empathetic idea that you don't look into the eyes of the creatures you eat. Once that connection is made, a Brit is more likely to anthropomorphize the animal, seeing them eye to eye as another living being, which can be very off-putting when it comes time to eat. In most places around the world, many people are far less removed from the butchering process, perhaps only 1 to 2 generations away from a time where slaughtering, gutting, and quartering your own animal was a regular practice. For billions around the world, this way of life is still a daily routine. Having the luxury to avoid certain foods purely out of empathy is reserved for those living in abundance, and the UK has arguably been the gold standard of abundance for the better part of the last 2 centuries. And while modern technology has eliminated the need to look fish in the face, as you can now buy frozen slabs of salmon that come from halfway across the world, through the average British household's historical unfamiliarity with the whole seafood process, that culture of straying away from seafood lingers on to this day. With all of this said, food culture in the UK is quickly changing. Britain today is one of the most diverse nations in the world. The introduction of cuisines from every corner of the world is changing the British palate at a rate never before seen. On top of the melding of cultures, Brexit seems to be growing the seafood market as well. With UK fisheries now less dependent on European markets to buy seafood, wholesalers are pushing their product harder onto domestic consumers instead. At this rate, who knows? Maybe in a few years, the UK will be the next Japan in the seafood scene. Thanks so much for watching, but listen, while I enjoyed making this video, it's a tremendous commitment of time and effort as I'm a one-man show. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing so I can continue making more content.